my name is Jason and I will be your SPSS tutor for an indefinite period of time. Now the title of this channel is called SPSS is Fun because, well, you guessed it, SPSS is actually a lot of fun, particularly when you know how to use it efficiently. So my goal of this video and of the videos to follow will be to make SPSS easy and convenient to use. And for this video in particular, you do not have to have the program open. I really just want you to watch this video, get a feel for the program. Now if the video is appearing a little blurry, just click on the little gear icon at the bottom of the video and make sure you are watching this in HD. So without further ado, let us begin. When you click on the SPSS icon on your desktop, this is what you'll see. This is what pops up first. Now what you'll most likely end up doing is just closing this pop-up window here. Okay, it's a little bit easier to use the menu options to navigate through your data files. So I'm just going to do that. Now this is called the data editor window, and you can see it says data editor right here. And within this window are two tabs at the bottom left corner of the screen. Here we have data view and we have variable view. When you first decide to use SPSS to analyze your data, the first window you will play with will be the variable view tab. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that one. And in the variable view tab, this is primarily where you're going to be managing your variables. Now, in a later video, I will explain what each of these columns here mean. But for now, I really just want to direct your attention to the first column, titled Name. And this is the column where you are going to be listing the names of each of your variables. So suppose you are conducting a survey. You could enter each of the survey questions here, each of them being their own variable. Or you might have just simply different variables from an experiment. So, for example, height or age. Now that being said, I suggest the first variable you enter into this column will be your ID variable. And ID stands for identification number. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to double click onto the cell. Okay, and it's similar to Excel in terms of entering values. And I'm going to type in ID. Okay, and that stands for identification number. And you're going to want a unique ID number for each of your cases. So again, suppose you're doing a survey and you have 10 participants and thus 10 completed surveys. Each of the participants should have a unique ID number. So, for example, participant 1 can have ID number 1, participant 2 can have ID number 2, and so on and so forth. Now, just to play around here a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and add two more variables. Okay, and the first one is going to be sex, and then my second variable is going to be height. Okay, so now we have three variables here. First one is just our ID, and then we have sex and height. Now, SPSS does not save automatically, so you need to save your work regularly. And you can do that by clicking on the little floppy disk up in the top left-hand corner of this screen here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, what you'll notice here is that the file type is .sav, or it has a .sav file extension. Okay, and that's linking to your SPSS data file. So I'm going to go ahead and type in video1 data file. Okay, and I'm going to just save that for now in my documents. And what you see here just propped up is the viewer window, and I'm not going to talk about this window right now, but it will come back in a short period of time. Okay, back to our data editor window. So now that we have our variables named, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Data View tab. Now, While the variable view tab allows you to manage your variables, the data view tab allows you to manage your data. And what you'll notice here is that in the first row, running along the top, we have our variables. And we made 3 variables, and you can see the 3 variables right here. Now, along the side, down this first column, okay, we have the row number. Okay. Now, it's imperative that you fill in the ID variable column. And you might be saying, hey, Jay, why do I need that column if the first column already has numbers? And I will respond, because these numbers are just the row numbers. They are not case numbers. The data that you enter into these cells can be reordered just like you might do in Excel. However, these row numbers will not hang with the data that they were initially corresponded to. So that is why it is very important to have a variable labeled ID, which will then hang with the data in the corresponding row. So let's go ahead and fill in the first variable data. I told you we had 10 participants, so I'm just going to enter ID numbers 1 through 10. All right, simple enough. And let's just, for the sake of simplicity, okay, I'm going to put in 1. And 1 is going to represent males. And I'm going to have 5 males. And I'm going to put in 2 here. And 2 is going to represent females. Now, you can enter text. You can do it, but it's a little bit easier to enter numbers, and I'll explain that in a little bit or in another video. But the important thing here, and I'm going to mention this now, and I'll mention it many times again in the future, is that you always want to have your code book handy. Okay, and your code book is basically where you're going to associate a number with a category of a variable. So, for example, for the variable sex, we'll have 2 categories. We'll have male and we'll have female. Okay, and I'm going to associate the number 1 with male, and I'm going to associate the number 2 with female. So down this list here, instead of having male, female, it's going to have 1s and 2s, and I'm going to know 1s are males and 2s are females because I have my code book next to me, and I'm looking at that for reference. Now for height, I'm just going to again type in arbitrary values here, but let's just say males are generally taller than females, so we're going to make our men a little bit taller on average, okay, than our females. And now we've entered our data. 3 variables, 10 participants. Each participant has an ID, a unique ID, that's important. Each participant has a value for their sex and a value for their height. Now, what I'm going to do here is continue on and do some analysis. And that is the point, after all, of SPSS. It's for doing data analysis. And now the simplest way to just quickly analyze this data is to click in that top left-hand corner cell, left click, and then drag down to the bottom right-hand corner cell. And then I'm going to right click. I'm going to choose descriptive statistics. And again, here that window pops up again. That was our viewer window. Okay, and in our viewer window, or as some like to call it, our output window, all of our analyses will show up here. So if you're producing graphs, if you're producing charts, they will all come here. Okay. Now, if you remember what I clicked on, I chose descriptive statistics. And what it has provided us with is a frequency table for each of our variables. Now, the first table may seem redundant, but it's actually important for checking your cases, especially when you have large sample sizes. You can see in this table that we have 1 case for each of our ID numbers, which is what we expect considering each case must have a unique ID number. Starting from where we left off, I'm just going to reiterate again here. We have our ID frequency table, and you can see that we have one frequency or a frequency of 1 for each of the ID variable values, and that's correct because we know that we want just one entity or case per ID number. And we also have frequency tables for the other two variables, and just checking, we can see that these tables are correct. If you remember, we had a value of 1 to represent males, and you can see we have 5 males, and that's because I chose 5 males. And we have a value of 2 to represent females, and you can see we have 5 females. Okay, and also checking our height. Now, I don't recall how many people were 3 feet or 4 feet or 5 feet or 6 feet, but this seems reasonable because I tried to distribute it about evenly. Okay, and so your frequency tables are going to be a go-to for checking your data, and I will have another video where I talk about checking your data or cleaning your data. Okay, but for now, this is where I'll leave that. Now, one cool thing you can do, and I'll just show you quickly, is that you can double click on the table and you'll see these dotted lines that appear around it, and then you can right click and go to create graph. So I can right away create a graph from this data, and I'm going to go ahead and just click on bar graph, and it's going to process and it's going to produce me a bar graph. Now it literally produced a bar graph from the table. You can see frequency, percent, valid percent, cumulative percent, and that's exactly what it has shown me here. And there's one thing that is important to know about SPSS, and that is that it will do literally whatever you ask, even if the result doesn't really make any sense. In this bar graph, SPSS has converted the table into the bar graph, although the table is actually a much better way to represent that data. So one thing to remember when you're doing SPSS and when you're doing complicated analyses is that just because it does it for you doesn't mean it's right, or doesn't mean that it's the best way to do that process or procedure or to get that result. Now, in a later video, I will explain more about editing charts and graphs and how to export them, but I will conclude this video by saving the output we have just generated so that you may come back to it at a later time. So, following the same procedure we used previously, I just want you to click on the floppy disk and choose a file name, and in this case, I will choose video 1 output. Video 1 output. And one thing to notice here is that we have a .spv file extension. Okay? Now I want you to remember this, that your output is different from your data file. And you can see that again through the .spv extension here. If you remember, the data file was saved with a .sav file extension. So I'm going to save this to my documents again. And one thing to know or to remember is that when you go back and say you want to look at this stuff at a later time, if you click on your .spv file, it will open both windows, that is the data editor window and the viewer window, but it will only show you the output. That is, only the viewer window, and that's this window right here, will be populated with information. Now, if you open the .sav file, it will also open both windows, the data editor window and the viewer window, and here's the data editor window, but only the data editor window will be populated. The viewer window will be blank. So either what I recommend you do is to always open your data window here, and then you can open up your output window at a later time. Or if you just want to look at your output, then just open the .spv extension file. Okay, so now that we've saved our work, we are ready to exit SPSS and thus conclude our intro video. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for our next video in this SPSS video series called SPSS is Fun. Cheers!